Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar covering the topic of preparing for and responding to active shooter incidents for local governments. This training is intended for local governments, especially those serving communities under 50,000 people and their partners. I'm your host, Jay Dong from BCT Partners. I want to first offer a disclaimer that some of the information covered in this webinar is sensitive in nature and may make people feel uncomfortable. If at any point you wish to exit the webinar, please feel free to do so. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the support from HUD's Office of Policy Development and Research and the Distressed Cities Technical Assistance Program that made this webinar possible. I'd like to also thank you for taking time away from your busy schedule to participate in today's webinar. Next, I'd like to go over some housekeeping items. During today's session, we will ask you to use the chat box function at the bottom right corner of the screen to input your questions, comments, and feedback throughout the presentation. During the Q&A session at the end, please direct all your questions to our panelists. If you experience any technical difficulties, please send me a direct message so that I can help you troubleshoot the issue. We will also be taking several live polls during the presentation. Please follow the instructions on the screen to access Mentimeter on your mobile device or on your computer to participate in the poll. Now I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. First up, we have joining us Raina Anderson, a consultant with the Thomas Consulting Group, an attorney. Raina began her legal career prosecuting felony criminal cases as an assistant district attorney in Hinds County, Mississippi. She went on to serve as Special Assistant Attorney General for the state of Mississippi for over 13 years, which included providing training to law enforcement officers and municipal agencies across the state of Mississippi. Next, we have Mr. Aaron Miller, the Director of Department of Public Safety, Communications, and Emergency Management in Arlington, Virginia. Mr. Miller previously held the position of Director of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness for the city of New Orleans, Louisiana. In that role, he was responsible for administration and oversight of the city's Homeland Security enterprise. This included development of preparedness policy, plans, initiatives, and leading the city's public safety unified command group through high-profile special events, critical incidents, and major disasters. Next, we have Officer Gypsy Ward. Officer Ward recently retired as an investigator for the Mississippi Attorney General's Office, specializing in sex crimes and domestic violence, training law enforcement in both fields. Officer Ward has 26 years of law enforcement experience and is currently assigned to the Uniform Patrol Division at the South Haven Police Department in South Haven, Mississippi. And last but not least, we have joining us Sergeant Tara Crum, who is also with the Uniform Patrol Division at the South Haven Police Department in South Haven, Mississippi. Sergeant Crum has 12 years of experience in law enforcement and holds a bachelor's degree in sociology, criminal justice certificate, as well as a master's degree in criminology. Without further ado, let's get into our presentation today. Here you see our agenda. Our topic for this webinar is active shooter, and our goal is to provide valuable information and useful tools for small and rural communities in need of additional support and resources. In the United States, many small town and suburban areas struggle with financial and logistical obstacles when seeking valuable training and additional resources to properly prepare and respond to an active shooter incident. We're going to begin with explaining what constitutes an active shooter incident in the United States and best practices for planning and preparing should an incident occur in your community. Next, we will explore vital steps for active shooter planning and preparedness and emphasize critical protocols for immediate response to an active shooter situation. Then we will summarize essential procedures for early, midterm, and long-term recovery and share resources and support available for active shooter planning and recovery. We will conclude by conducting a Q&A session. Through the interactive nature of this webinar, we hope to capture information and insights from you directly to help us better understand the challenges small local governments are experiencing regarding active shooter planning, response, and recovery. By sharing the poll results in real time, we also hope to facilitate some peer learning and overall understanding of how small local governments and communities can respond to an active shooter incident. Ultimately, our goal is for you to take away ideas and resources that can further enhance your planning and preparation capacity and confidence, provide practical guidance to help local communities prevent and recover from active shooter incidents, and offer best practices for ensuring community resilience. To help everyone get familiarized with the live polling process, we will now administer our first set of poll questions. So please go to menti.com on your mobile device or computer and enter the code 74549021 to access the first set of questions. I will now stop sharing the slide deck and show you guys the live results of the poll. Again, the code is 74549021. We can also put the code in the chat for those who are having difficulty accessing the link. These are just a couple of practice questions, all right? So let me put the code in the chat, 74549021. See, folks have already started to input your answers. I think someone is having trouble getting to the poll question. Again, you want to open your browser on your mobile device or your computer and log into www.menti.com and put in the code 74549021. All right, in the interest of time, I am going to go to the next question. According to the Department of Homeland Security, an active shooter incident is over very quickly, usually under 15 minutes. Again, this is a true and false question. All right, let's go to the next question here. All right, in the interest of time, I'm going to leave the poll open, but hop back on to the slide deck. Bear with me, folks. want to thank you for participating in the first set of polls. We're now going to cover what constitutes an active shooter incident and best practices for planning and preparing should an incident occur in your community. Now I'm going to pass the mic over to Raina to kick off this section with some statistical information regarding active shooter incidents in the U.S. Raina? We can't hear you, Raina. I think you're muted.
I was. Thank you very much. Sorry, you guys, and welcome. Since this webinar is intended for local governments serving communities under 50,000 people and their partners, I wanted to provide you with some current statistical data on active shooter incidents across the country. As you can see with the slide, there were more than 624 mass shootings in the U.S. in 2022, and according to the advocacy group Gun Violence Archive, which defines a mass shooting as incidents in which 4 or more people are injured or killed, there has not been a single week in 2022 without at least 4 incidents. The year before, in 21, there were nearly 700 mass shootings, spiking from 610 in 2020 and 417 in 2019. Next slide. Based on the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the FBI's definition, not all mass shootings are active shooting incidents, but all active shooter incidents are considered in the category of mass shootings. The frequency of active incidents and mass shootings has increased dramatically in recent years, as you could just see from the slide, and it leaves survivors and communities reeling. In 2021, the FBI designated 61 shootings across the United States as active shooter incidents, which is defined as an event involving 1 or more suspects who participate in an ongoing, random, or systematic shooting spree, demonstrating the intent to harm others with the objective of mass murder. According to the FBI, there was a 52.5% increase in active shootings from 2020 to 2021. Looking further back, the nation experienced a shocking 96.8% increase in active shooter incidents from 2017 to 2021. These tragedies are a national problem. They are affecting all types of communities, from small towns in the South to Sunbelt suburbs and large northeastern cities. Predicting where and when the next active shooter incident will occur is impossible, so every community must be prepared to respond to this threat. Which brings us to planning and preparing. But before we discuss planning and preparation, I will hand it back to Jay for more poll questions.
Thank you, Raina. So we got 2 more poll questions coming up. I will go back to the Mentimeter poll. And you guys can hop back onto the Mentimeter poll to input your question. See, folks are already taking the time to input their answers. Question is, what challenges is your community facing in preparing for an active shooter incident? Okay, folks, a couple more minutes. Really good feedback here. All right, in the interest of time, we will go to the next poll question. Which is, when was the last time you assessed your physical plant and surroundings for security and test your security policies and procedures? All right. In the interest of time, let me go back into our webinar delivery. Thank you for inputting your answers. This is very informative and valuable input that will align with the rest of the content in our presentation. I'm going to turn it back to Raina. Go ahead, Raina.
All right. There are many challenges facing communities, especially with those with fewer than 50,000 residents. Capacity constraints impact the ability of law enforcement and emergency responders to allocate time for professional development, implement department-wide active shooter response plans, and provide adequate response times. In addition, the perception that the smaller the community, the less likely an active shooter event will occur can result in a lack of much-needed community health resources and the prioritizing of coordinated efforts within the community. I will now turn it over to Mr. Aaron Miller to kick off this section.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. As Raina mentioned, my name is Aaron Miller. When it comes to preparing for an active shooter incident, planning is one of the most critical components to minimizing risk and avoiding any preventable loss. Many of you just mentioned a few barriers to planning, the cost, the lack of expertise, maybe even the denial that an active shooter threat is or could happen within your community. What we're going to talk about are low cost, very low lift, planning tools that do not require extensive expertise. And then the rest of our subject matter experts are also going to talk about in detail some components of planning and response. So today we're hoping to give you some of these tools that can help you and your organization prepare an action plan that you should regularly revisit and revise depending upon your specific circumstances. The purpose of a plan is to help to identify those departments, those agencies, those partners, and the key responsibilities that they may have in response to an active or potential active shooter event. The use of this plan is to inform your staff, your students, for instance, if you're in an academic facility, residents of your community, departments and agencies that are your partners, of what their roles and responsibilities are. Given the increase in frequency, training, rehearsal, and understanding the key components of these plans is extremely valuable, and it should be compulsory within your organizations, exactly like a fire drill or any other preparedness drill. Prevention is not and cannot be a passive process. You have to take an active role in developing these plans. A strong and overt commitment from the organization is needed, and that could be leadership, that could be an advocate such as yourself within your department or agency to press for the development of these plans. This is generally demonstrated through the formal adoption of these policies, these programs, or plans to help support targeted violence prevention efforts, and the establishment of things like threat assessment management teams and education, again, for all members of your department, agency, or organization to help underscore the importance of the processes and promote acceptance and engagement by all. The next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about institutional hardening, which is a very easy place to start. Any office or institution preparing for an emergency, like an active shooter incident, should begin by documenting and assessing the current state of the facilities in which they work. This could be as simple as enumerating the types and circumstances of threats that you may face, as well as the physical evacuation procedures and access and exit points. When you assess these risks, it's important to examine how those entry and exit points could be exploited and how those security vulnerabilities can be mitigated such that harm to the site or employees or individuals there can be reduced. So some critical questions you could ask. How easily can someone gain access? What is the ease of movement throughout the site? They get in through one door, they're able to access the entire facility. What are the lockdown procedures? What are the video surveillance capabilities? What is the protocol for security and notification of individuals within the building or in the facility? What is the notification for an all clear when something is over for individuals who are in a facility? Any thorough assessment will also look at those potential sources of vulnerability in things like the hiring process, the reporting processes. So if someone notices an incident or has an issue or a violent encounter with an individual, how do they report that? Orientation programs, discipline termination procedures, all of these areas are places in which your policies and procedures can help reduce potential for violence in the workplace or violence in a school or business. The next component after assessing vulnerabilities on the next slide is training. You want to be able to provide actions for staff and occupants that can help make a facility safe. And again, it could be as obvious as controlling entry points, requiring visitors to sign in. Most of those hardening measures really fall into two categories, as you see here. You can have physical, or you can have procedural or process controls. Physical controls include things like door locking, keypad, card access systems, fencing, gates, and security cameras, things like that. Procedural and process controls could be things like employee screening. It could be the visitor access policy, threat reporting requirements, evacuation drills and procedures, lockdown drills. Both of those, though, not only the physical, but also the procedural and the process, really can make a significant impact on the security of your institution or your facility. The next component is about agency coordination. And that's one of those challenging and uncomfortable aspects. Really, it's about having the topic being discussed easily with staff, occupants, or visitors at a facility. Acknowledging that vulnerability can sometimes cause leaders or individuals who are in charge to feel like they're unable to adequately protect their organization or their occupants. And that's far from the case. What we want to encourage in this instance is acknowledging vulnerability, really striving for transparency, and that transparency can help increase readiness because employees, residents, visitors, students, whomever it may be, then understands how they can contribute to being in a safe environment and how everyone else's roles and responsibilities come together. Again, training individuals is an expression of that care and of that transparency, and it's instrumental in helping everyone understand their roles. Without that training, incidents can escalate. Things that could have been stopped then have the potential to continue to get worse, and injuries and fatalities become more likely. And we see that through our research into incidents, that facilities or places that have a plan and have trained for that plan have much better outcomes. We do understand that most organizations can't afford to have adequate first responders on site all the time to respond to an emergency of the scale of an active shooter incident. So having that pre-established line of communication, sharing plans with your local first responders is key to assuring an efficient and effective response to an incident. Emergency response resources will always be required to deal with the threat, help treat any injuries, or document any fatalities. But by inviting local police and fire departments and rescue agencies to a site to help build relationships, familiarize them with the building, so that they can also understand the vulnerabilities, that helps to make sure that everyone is better prepared when they respond to an emergency. Even though most active shooter incidents only last a few minutes, their impact on communities can last for years. On the slide talking about long-term recovery and evaluation, we've got some information here about how organizations can have a plan to have that care extend beyond just the immediate event. Counseling, coping with the experience, and beyond those significant personal needs, organizations need to have a plan to minimize the impact on its operations. So not just thinking about the employee, the impact on them and those that they work with, or the students, for instance, in your organization, but beyond that, how you're going to be able to continue to provide operations of your business or agency. As many public institutions obviously provide very critical services, a business continuity plan should be developed to help limit any interruptions. Is that another facility that you may have to use to carry out business operations? Is there another team of employees that can take the place of those that have been impacted significantly? All of those can help to continue operations, because it's important to recognize that after an active shooter incident, the facility may be shut down for a period of time while law enforcement processes a crime scene, or again, while individuals who have been affected receive the appropriate care and support necessary following an incident such as this. In these cases, again, organizations really need to think about how they shift operations to another site, or for instance, how you can carry out pieces of your mission virtually. Beyond developing that business continuity plan, it's important to continually look at and reassess your plans. When circumstances change, when, for instance, physical access controls change within a building, when processes and procedures change, you need to reassess those response plans. You should be striving to improve safety, business performance, and look for ways to expand and enhance its response plans to address any gaps and be able to put in place additional procedural, again, or process and physical controls to help save lives and keep people safe.
Thank you, Aaron. And now we're going to hear a little bit from Raina regarding the funding of opportunities for preparedness. Raina.
Thank you. As you know, we've discussed that there are many barriers, especially with towns and municipalities of 50,000 people or less. And part of that is dealing with funding and training in order to be prepared. So on the screen, you will find some resources and funding opportunities that can assist your city with active shooter preparedness. These grants and programs provide funding to help with implementing school safety measures, to help with preparing for mass violence, and how to respond safely and effectively to active shooter and other violent threats. This list will be made available for review on the HUD Exchange soon.
Thank you, Raina. Now we're going to turn things over to Officer Ward and Sergeant Crum to provide guidance on as to how communities should be responding to an immediate active shooter incident. But before we do so, here's going to be a couple of more poll questions. So if you don't mind, go ahead and hop back onto the Mentimeter poll. And the question is if there is an active shooting incident taking place, the first thing you should do is call 911, run to the nearest safe exit, go see who is shooting so that you can tell the police. I'll let folks take their time to provide your input. All right, as we have over 100 responses here, and for the sake of time, I'm going to advance to the other question, which is if you can't run to safety, you should. I'm going to hop back over to the live delivery of our slide deck. Now let's cover incident response, beginning with active shooter event phrase. Gypsy and Tara.
I think we need to unmute.
Yeah, gonna unmute you guys. There you go.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did y'all hear anything I said?
Nope.
No. Okay. Man.
Sorry.
I said one of the poll questions. One of the poll questions should have been, Facebook Live it, because a lot of our active shooters these days are being Facebook Lived and scrolled on social media. The second thing I was trying to give a disclaimer is I'm a cop's cop. I've been a police officer for 26 years. I love Jesus and I cuss a little, but so if anything comes out, I apologize in advance. We're going to go over some of the active shooter phases as far as law enforcement, and I'm not the kind of person that sits around and reads something off a PowerPoint, so I'm just going to kind of wing it. But clearly, in an active shooter situation, one of the first things that you might hear, obviously, gunshots. If you hear those, we obviously suggest that you find a good hiding spot. If you hear screams getting closer to you, that means the shooter's getting close to you. So find a new hiding spot. The second phase of it is with the event duration. That's basically where the people are calling 911. They're trying to let everybody know what's going on, the movement inside the buildings, and alarms. You'll be getting some of that. And at the end, once the shooter is no longer active, neutralized, surrendered, what you should expect is the aftermath. The shooter's no longer a threat. What we're going to do as law enforcement officers is we're going to try to collect everybody we can and put them in a central location and make them witnesses. I've said before, I responded to an active shooter many, many years ago, and that's what we had to do. And this was in a factory type setting where we had hundreds of employees running at us at one time. None of us knew who the active shooter was. So we had to relocate all these people and try to work out who the active shooter was. I wouldn't say thankfully, but thankfully, he had already taken his own life in there. So we were able to detain and clear that situation pretty quickly. But it is true, active shooters only last a few minutes at a time, but there's some that don't. I think we can all kind of go back to the Orlando shooting that started at 2:05 and that didn't end until 5 o'clock in the morning. That's a major city, well more than 50,000 people. And it took them 3.5 hours, almost 3 hours, to get that situation under control. And then you take a situation that happened in Baldy, Texas, probably a population of under 50,000 people. Once again, I believe personally that was lack of training and lack of resources for that particular area, which cost many, many children their lives. So what am I doing? The next one. Oh, I'm sorry, I lost my paperwork. I think we learned a lot with both those shooting. Obviously, Orlando, the pole shooting ended up being the second largest, almost terrorist attack in the U.S. since 9/11. It was over 3 hours response time before that actual shooter was detained. Some of the issues with that is the people who was calling in, as far as law enforcement goes, is the suspect looked like everybody in that club that night. So it took a very long time for us to determine, or law enforcement to determine, which one was the actual shooter, because everybody was calling in. They're saying that they all look like him. I think you've already come down to strictly just lack of training and lack of resources for that small town. Once the event begins, obviously, as law enforcement officers, we want you to run, hide. We don't suggest fighting unless you absolutely have to, and it comes down to it. These are the protocols given by Homeland Security. Obviously, we want you to hide. We want you to run. If you run towards us, at least hold your hands up, or tell people to hold their hands up, just to let us know that you're not the one we're looking for. So if you go out and you're, teaching the smaller communities about how law enforcement will want you to handle this, if you're running out, everybody says run out of the building, we don't know who's got the gun, and we don't know who's firing the bullets. But if you have your hands in the air when you're exiting the building, we can pretty much determine it ain't you, so we can move on to the next. The immediate response of active shooter, it's going to last through several hours. The first response, obviously, is us getting there. The second response is clearing the scene. Third response is going to be for us to get the numerous witnesses and all the evidence and stuff collected. So it's quite an event when this happens. When the shooting is ongoing, there's things we want you to look for. Look if he's nearby. If he is, get going. If there's any way you can let law enforcement officers know by calling 911, hey, he's in this area right now. We don't suggest it, but it really, really helps us in these types of situations. If you're listening, like I said, to any screams, listen. If the gunshots are getting further away, you're probably in a safe spot. If you hear people screaming or footsteps, they're probably coming towards you, and you need to find a different route. This might be time to fight. The smell, I don't know if a lot of people know what gun smoke smell like or when a gun's been fired, but if you've ever smelt it, it's very, very distinct. And when you're having an active shooter, they're normally firing off numerous rounds, and that smell in the air and the smoke from that gun, you're going to be able to determine, hey, I think that's quite possibly gun smoke, and they're getting close. The smell I wouldn't too much worry about, because if you can smell it, you can dang sure hear it. As far as touch, like the walls and the windows and the floor, if you feel vibrations or temperatures, some of these people, they could go in and set fires, especially if you're locked in a room and you're hiding to try to lure you out. So if you can feel that and find a different exit strategy, I would highly recommend it. As far as me, what I like to tell people is when I go to a grocery store, and everybody goes to a grocery store, you need to look when you walk in there, where's your nearest exits? If something was to happen right now, which way should I go? So when you're just out in your normal life, look for exits when you go there. Me and Raina has had hundreds of dinners together. Raina, where do I sit at a restaurant? My back to the door. Always, every time, so I can see where I'm going or where I need to go. And sadly, that is the world we've come to. Like I tell my son, I need you to know where the exits are at your school. So I would suggest that in your towns, get your community together. And that is one thing to let them know is when you go out and about, find your exits. You can go to the next slide. After everything's settled, I kind of went over this before, what we will do is we will assemble and count for all the witnesses and any individual that was there during the interview. Or was able to evacuate. We call this we'll have a rallying location where we are to put everybody who was involved. We will also go in and clear the building and locate individuals who are not able to evacuate the scene. We scan and clear buildings for those who may be hiding. After that, we try to, after we get statements, we try to put them back with their families, connect victims with witnesses and loved ones. We also try to keep the media away from them because we know that at some points they can be a lot to, especially after something that's traumatic. So we'll have somebody there who's managing journalists and media. And if you do not have, and I know that we're talking about very rural areas, and I've traveled the state and I know about rural areas in the state of Mississippi, at least, they don't have these types of setups or have the ability to have this. My advice to those smaller communities is to reach out to your volunteer fire departments, reach out to your local FBI field agents, and a plan in place. Because if you call and you set up with some of these major, like the FBI, Homeland Security, your fire department, and you say, "Hey, I want to put a plan together. I know we don't have a lot of time and a lot of money because the communities are small." They will come with you and they'll work with you on how to build it. And also, if you live in a small community of only 50,000 people or less, if you went to one of the local high schools and says, "Hey, we want to do some training on possible active shooters," I guarantee you there's not going to be a high school that's going to turn you down because they want their schools to be just as safe as you do. We do that here in South Haven. We have active shooter drills at our local high schools all the time. The sad part for law enforcement officers is that we can't predict every situation. So every situation we go into is going to be different. And we're going to have to respond to every situation different. There's no standard protocol when it comes to active shooter training. If it was, our lives would be a heck of a lot easier as far as going out and training other law enforcement officers to do it, because every instance is going to be different. It's going to be a school, a movie theater, a nightclub, and to be able to train on all the different scenarios is impossible. So you can move to the next slide.
I believe there were poll questions in between ours. Would you like to go ahead and do that?
Yes. So I will go ahead and open up the poll again. The next question we're going to administer is, what type of resources do you feel your organization is lacking to properly respond to an incident? Whether it's personnel, funding, supplies, expertise, and etc. Okay, in the interest of time, I will go ahead and advance the question to the next one. What, if any, resources from recovering from physical and psychological aftermath of an active shooter incident are available in your community? All right, in the interest of time, we're going to go to the next poll question. Which of the following is not required in the standard incident report in the case of an active shooter incident? I will leave the poll open, but let's transition back to the slides. I'm going to get back to Officer Gypsy and Tara.
All right, so now we're going to be going over some of those questions and how it relates to the different phases of recovery. So the first phase is going to be your early recovery phase, and that's going to begin within hours of the incident. So that's going to be as soon as the threat is eliminated and there's no longer crisis. Now we're going to start processing through the scene, and this could take days and up to weeks before we get back in business or whatever the crisis location is, whenever everything starts moving back into normalcy. In this stage, there's two main focuses. And the first main focus is obviously our victims and getting them the support and the the medical help that they need and getting their families with them, as well as restoring the site of the attack itself. So the best way of helping out our victims and getting them streamlined with their family is going to have open lines of communication and having one person as your main point of contact when it comes to dealing with the hospitals. Typically, from a law enforcement perspective, this is going to be your case agent, whoever your primary detective is on the case itself. Typically, they will choose to be your main point of contact, or they will elect for someone else to take on that responsibility who can go direct with them. This is also going to be beneficial for the hospitals because if there's a change in a patient's status, or if a patient needs to be moved to another hospital, another location, then they're able to go direct and make it very simple and direct with the law enforcement agency themselves. This is obviously going to help with getting the family to them as well, which is priority one. The second aspect of the health issue is the mental health. So the mental health of all of those involved, that's including victims, witnesses, but also your first responders and your fire and medical. This would be the time I would suggest now, while you're in the planning steps, reach out to your local government, find out about insurance, get in touch with some of these grants, and get set up the crisis counseling programs. These are created to respond in these traumatizing events in order to better help all of the victims, survivors, and their families, and also responders. So this would be the time in this recovery phase, this initial recovery phase, that we would implement those crisis programs. So I would suggest reaching out now so that you're better equipped whenever the time comes. We're now going to be moving on to the mid-recovery phase. In this phase, this is going to be a couple weeks typically after the incident. To be when life starts slowly going back to normal. I say normal loosely, but the business is going to be back in order. People are returning to work, children going back to school, whatever the case may be, wherever the incident occurred. So in this phase is when it is going to be the critical time to do your incident report, where it is a full breakdown of the incident itself and going back and reflecting on what we did right, what we did wrong, where we can improve, and if we need to make some changes regarding our protocol and policy. So in this debrief is what we would call it in law enforcement. In this debrief, I would suggest having as many heads present as possible. So that would be different agencies, representatives from multiple agencies. Our critical incident that we had a response from multiple local law enforcement agencies. So in this debrief, we would have asked for them to participate as well, because they were able to give input as to what would have made their response better in aiding us, and vice versa. Getting involved with your sheriff, your mayor, your alderman, all of the individuals that are going to be interacting on that day and be concerned and helping as best they can. So in this moment, we're going to be breaking that down. We're going to be going through all of the response, and we're going to be compiling as much information as we can so that we can be better prepared for the future. It would be in these times, for an example, after Uvalde, just to kind of give perspective as to how these help. After Uvalde, our agency equipped our supervisor vehicles to have breaching tools. This was something that we had not been concerned with or realized that we needed to be concerned with until there was an incident where they had a barricaded subject and could not gain entry. Our supervisor vehicles, our patrol vehicles, did not have any kind of breaching tools. So learning from that incident allows us to be better prepared for any future incidents that we might have in our area. So also in this phase, we need to be mindful that our crisis counseling is going to be phasing out, because that's a temporary fix, and we need to be looking at a more permanent solution if our victims and survivors need such. So this would be something that we need to be implementing and keeping in mind so that it's a seamless transition. During this phase, legal proceedings will begin. As law enforcement, the detectives are going to be working together probably as a team because the scene is so large. And you're going to be putting all of that evidence and information together for your district attorney's office. And you're going to be working with them for several months after the case, attempting to get conviction for your offender involved. So be expecting a lot of movement and a lot of work on the law enforcement side of that. There will be media reaching out. They're going to want the update as to what's going on. So being mindful about the media being in and out of the city, in and out of town, they are going to want a point of contact. So again, it's all about that streamline and control of information. If you have one person that they know that they can go to and rely on to get the information, that's going to be the easiest. It's also going to help protect victims so that victims and survivors are not harassed by the media or feeling overwhelmed by such. So now we're going to be moving on to the long-term recovery, which is going to be the final phase. And keep in mind that the year mark there's typically some type of memorial or commemoration that occurs. And from a law enforcement perspective, that's not typically something that we would organize. However, we are commonly included in this event. So be mindful that it means something to the victims. They're going to want to say thank you, plan to participate in that as best you can and be representative. As a local business or company that wants to set up that commemoration, just be mindful of what the survivors feel that they're ready for. So make sure that you reach out and coordinate with them as to what is best when setting up that memorial. Keep in mind that this trauma lingers for years and years to come, and it can cause a lot of physical scarring, but it can also cause so much mental scarring. So keep that in mind moving forward, and so that your community has the best chance of recovering. Now, I'm not sure who this is going to. Jay, I believe.
Yes, I'll take it. I want to thank you to Officer Ward and Officer Plum. I'm going to pass the mic to Raina to address some funding opportunities available for responding to an active shooter incident. Raina?
Yes, earlier we gave you a list of funding opportunities regarding preparedness, and now this slide you'll see a list of funding opportunities regarding response. There are various funding opportunities offered to cities designed to supplement the available resources and services of entities responding to acts of mass violence, and to provide short-term funding to schools, to communities, to provide counseling, crisis mental health services, and acute needs stemming from a traumatic event, such as an active shooter incident. So make sure you check our website to get a full listing of these funding options, and there'll be hyperlinks to help you get to it much easier for your convenience.
Thank you, Raina. We have a couple of minutes left here, so let's go ahead and conduct our Q&A session. We just encourage you to go ahead and use the chat box and address all your questions to all of the panelists. So make sure you select all panelists so that we can see your chat coming through. And again, we're getting several questions and several same questions in terms of the availability of the links and the material shared today. So this webinar is being recorded, and we'll make sure the presentation along with transcripts are made available on HUDexchange.com at a later time. Let's see if the folks have any questions for our panelists. Okay, so there is a question about, I think this is directed towards Officer Ward. Someone is saying that they did not hear your response regarding where to sit in a restaurant. Would you mind answering that again, please?
Oh, I was saying if you go out to eat with me, a law enforcement officer, we will normally sit with our backs to the door because we're paranoid, and we always try to find what our exit strategy is in any situation. So I tell everybody that due to today's society is when you go to a grocery store or Walgreens is when you walk in there, just look and say, hey, that's my closest exit. If something goes down, that's the door I'm going out of. Just be prepared. That was what I was talking about with that.
Thank you. There's a question about what are your thoughts on active drill inside a particular company or organization?
Is that for us? Yes.
Yes.
I think that anytime you can train with local law enforcement officers on active shooter type trainings, I would absolutely do it. You can never not train enough, in our opinion, because it's not a matter of if it's going to happen; it's a matter of when.
Thank you. Another question is, I heard that cities with strict gun control have had an increase in crimes. Is that accurate?
I mean, I don't know the numbers on that. I'm not going to try to ramble and fib my way through that one. I would say that any city has the possibility of something happening. Do not be blinded by the rules because, I mean, narcotics are illegal and we still bust people for narcotics all the time. So don't think just because there's heavy gun control that a gun crime could not happen, because that absolutely is possible. So be mindful of it just the same. Don't have a false sense of security on that front.
Also, you have to realize that a majority of the weapons that we deal with on the streets, as far as when shootings and stuff are involved, they normally come up stolen anyway. So I don't think that like the gun control stuff would really affect if somebody set out to do ill intentions, they're going to find a way.
All right. I think a related question is, can anyone respond to how to convince communities/businesses, education centers that this threat is real and how to overcome the idea that it will never happen here?
I would tell them turn on the news, any news channel. Can't find an active shooter on your news on any other given day, then you're not out. It's on the news cycle. I don't know how you could educate anybody any more than the recent shootings we've had, as far as Uvalde or Sandy Hook, which is probably the most gruesome shooting in my experience has ever happened with that many children. The theater in Colorado, South Haven, Mississippi. They had an active shooter in a Walmart. Meridian, Mississippi, active shooter at a Lockheed Martin. Ridgeland, Mississippi, a female goes in, holds an employee hostage, and it's Facebook all across. It's live streamed on Facebook the whole time. Other than just getting them, I'm a numbers person, so you get them some numbers and some facts and present it with them, that might help.
All right. We got 2 more minutes. I think we could take one last question. What are the most common motivations for a perpetrator to commit a mass shooting? What environments are more likely to experience the threat?
And if we was able to pick that, we'd all be rich. If we was able to say, hey, that's Ohio. They're going to have a shooting tomorrow just because that's Ohio. We were able to pinpoint the rhyme or reason behind why people are evil. I think that we would be out of a job. Anything to add to that?
I was just going to say that several of the shootings, once you actually get down to the motives, our particular incident that we had here, it was a disgruntled employee, and he was resentful of how he had been treated. He felt it was unfair, and he returned to the property and had a full plan of attack. And unfortunately, he was connected to the business, but at the same time, we did have witnesses fellow coworkers or previous coworkers, that said that they saw suspicious behavior. So reporting that and being mindful and doing this preparedness is paramount in attempting to get ahead of the problem. We have to do it at least the best we can by reporting the suspicious behavior concerning activity, or they may even say things, that are concerning, mumbling threats, that type thing. Make sure to report that kind of stuff. But in the end, unfortunately, Gypsy's right in that you can't always predict it. So it's not always cut and dry like that.
I just want to piggyback off on what Sergeant Crum was saying there. It's as simple as the power of hello, particularly in a workplace or when you're dealing with individuals, maybe even at a school. Just the Department of Homeland Security has this acronym, OHNO, OHNO. Observe, initiate a hello, that's the H, hello, and navigate the risk. What's going on? You seem a little off today. Is something wrong? And then obtain help. That's the other O. If it's a suspicious behavior, let someone know, as Sergeant Crum said. It could be as simple as trying to connect them to resources that exist within your company to help support them, or to a threat mitigation resource, or to someone who can evaluate and say, yes, this situation warrants some additional attention.
Just to touch off that is now everything that you see is these people plan, and they study social media, they post on social media, and there's people seeing this, but the mentality of that's not my job gets us to where we're at today. Like, had you reported that one post, you could have prevented this, but the mentality of that's not my job is what we have to overcome.
Thank you, folks. I think we're at time. I hope you all found this webinar to be informative. Really appreciate all the attendees' interaction and feedback. It is time for us to close this out and talk about the next steps.
Okay, real quick, just wanted to remind everyone that when it's posted on the website, there are hyperlinks within that. For example, someone asked about a plan. There's a crisis communications plan hyperlink. So there are some resources within the site once it's posted.
Yes, and then we will, once the recording along with the transcript as well as the reference material get posted on HUDexchange.com, we can follow up and send out a mass email to all of the attendees to let you know where to gain access to the material covered today. All right, so one last final question for you all who are still on the call with us. What topics will be of interest to you for future webinars? And you can just drop that in the chat. This will help us prepare for additional training material. All right. Okay. I'll leave the chat going so you all can continue to input your comments. Okay. If you are interested in learning more about the HUD Distressed City Technical Assistance Program, you can access the webpage listed on this slide here, which again will be made available later on HUD Exchange. Additionally, I'd like to point out that again, the PDF copy of this webinar is full of hyperlinks, like Raina said, that will take you directly to the resources that were referenced. Not just the slides that are obviously tables with great grants information. There are links throughout the embedded in the pictures as well. So when you get the PowerPoint presentation, be sure to click through the links to access those reference material. All right. For additional questions about the TA program, feel free to email us at distressedcities@hud.gov. Thank you again, and this will conclude our webinar today. We wish you well in your future endeavors in serving your communities. I want to again thank Raina Anderson and our knowledgeable subject matter experts, Mr. Aaron Miller, Officer Gypsy Ward, and Sergeant Tara Crum. Thanks, everybody.